The distress beacon reached Earth 17 days after the attack. Not because it was slow, because the Vorathi had destroyed the Ardent Cross navigation array first, then the communication relay, then the secondary drive in that exact order, with the kind of precision that only comes from practice. The crew had survived on emergency oxygen and frozen ration packs, drifting through a corridor of space that no one patrolled in a ship that looked from the outside like a crushed tin can. 3 crew members did not make it to the rescue. Yusuf Amara, chief engineer, died when the engine room vented. He was 31. Priya Nair, navigation officer, died 12 hours after the attack from injuries no one could treat without a medical bay, and the medical bay had been on the section that depressurized. She was 26. Old Renard, the ship's cook and unofficial morale officer, died on day 9. No dramatic reason. His heart simply stopped in the cold. He was 62, and he had told everyone who would listen that he planned to retire after this run. Captain Dara Osai was the one who recorded their names into the emergency log. She did it with cracked fingers and a portable light because the main power was gone. She read their names out loud into the recorder even though there was no one else in the room. It felt important to say them. The Vorathi had broadcast the whole thing. That was the part that settled into the bones of everyone who heard about it later. The attack had been transmitted on open channels, not by accident, not as a warning to humanity specifically, but as a general announcement to the galaxy. A kind of performance. The Vorathi commander had narrated the strike in his own language, and the translation, when it came, was blunt. Humanity traveled in breakable things, and this was proof. Other alien civilizations had watched the broadcast. Some had filed it away. Some had found it uncomfortable. None had intervened. When the rescue ship finally reached the Ardent Cross, the crew was down to 9 people. They had been eating cold protein paste and rationing air for 11 days. Dara was the last one to board the rescue vessel. She stood at the airlock for a moment before stepping through, looking back at the wreck of the Ardent Cross, at the torn hull plates and the blackened scoring where Vorathi energy weapons had cut clean through the outer shell like it was paper. She did not say anything, she just looked. Then she stepped through the airlock, and the door sealed behind her. The Interstellar Defense Council heard the full report 6 days later. It was delivered by Admiral Sayoni Failalo, a large, quiet man who had the habit of letting silence do the heavy lifting in a room. He laid out the facts without drama. The Ardent Cross had been a civilian cargo vessel operating in a corridor that sat in a disputed zone between human trade routes and Vorathi-claimed space. The attack had been unprovoked. The Vorathi had made no territorial demand, issued no warning, requested no negotiation. They had simply fired, narrated the damage for an audience, and left. The council representatives from the outer colonies were the first to speak. They wanted sanctions, trade blockades, a formal diplomatic protest filed through the Interstellar Assembly. The council representatives from Earth's Defense Division said nothing for a long time. Then one of them, an older woman named Deputy Director Akafer, put a single document on the table. It was a project proposal. It had been written 6 years ago and approved in principle, and then quietly shelved because the political climate had not been right, the budget had not been there, the timing had not been correct. She said that the timing was now correct. She said that the budget was now available. She said that sanctions were a letter written to someone who did not read letters. The room was quiet for a long time after that. The vote was not close. Project Warden was greenlit the same afternoon. No press release, no public announcement. The budget authorization was buried inside a routine infrastructure bill that nobody read carefully. It looked like a maintenance allocation for Titan shipyards. That was intentional. Dara Os arrived back on Earth 3 days after the council vote. She was debriefed, medically cleared, and given 2 weeks of mandatory rest that she did not take. On the fourth day, she walked into a government building in Nairobi and sat across from Deputy Director Akafor without being invited. Akafor looked at her for a moment. Then she slid a folder across the table. Inside was a photograph of a woman younger than Dara, with the same wide forehead, the same way of holding her jaw. The name underneath read Dr. Nadia Osai, lead propulsion engineer, Titan Shipyards. Dara looked at the photograph of her sister. Then she looked up. Akafor said that Nadia had already been contacted. She had already said yes. The question was whether Dara wanted to be part of what came next, or whether she needed more time. Dara closed the folder. She said she did not need more time. She said she wanted to go back to that corridor. She said she wanted to go back in something that would make the Vorathi understand, not through anger, not through grief, but through the very specific and permanent kind of clarity that comes when a species you dismissed builds something you were not prepared for. Akafor nodded once. She told Dara to get some sleep. Titan was cold this time of year, and the work was about to begin. Titan smelled like cold metal and burnt insulation, and Nadia Osai had stopped noticing either a long time ago. She was standing in the middle of sublevel 3 kilometers below the surface of Titan, inside a facility that did not appear on any public map, when her access badge beeped and the main elevator opened. She did not look up from the structural diagram spread across the work table. She already knew who it was. Her sister walked across the floor, looked at the diagram, looked at the ceiling-high wall of material samples pinned in rows behind the table, and then looked at Nadia. Nadia said, "You're thinner." Dara said, "You changed your hair." They stood like that for a moment. Then Nadia walked around the table and put her arms around her sister, and Dara let her, and neither of them said anything for a little while. Then Dara pulled back and looked at the room properly. The facility was enormous, a carved rock cavern reinforced with structural polymer and filled, even at this early stage, with the organized chaos of serious engineering. Material test rigs lined one wall. Computer clusters occupied another. At the far end of the cavern, the first framing elements of something very large were already being assembled by a skeleton crew of technicians who worked in near silence with the focused energy of people who understood what they were part of. Dara asked what it was going to look like. Nadia picked up a smaller diagram, a side profile, and laid it on top of the structural map. The shape was not what Dara expected. She had imagined something aggressive, angular, sharp, built for intimidation. What Nadia had drawn was different. It was layered, dense. It reminded Dara strangely of a deep-sea creature, something that had evolved not to look threatening, but to survive pressure that would destroy everything else. Nadia explained her thinking quietly, the way she always explained things, as if the ideas were obvious once you saw them and she was just helping you see. Every other species in the galaxy, she said, built warships on the same principle. Protect the ship, project force outward. The Vorathi, the Tharani, the Sulkai, all of them. Thick hulls to keep damage out. Weapons to destroy before being destroyed. It was a logical approach if you assumed that the goal of a battle was to take as little damage as possible. But humans, Nadia said, had a different history. Humans had spent thousands of years building things that were meant to survive catastrophic failure. Their deep-sea vessels were designed to be crushed partially and still function. Their architecture evolved in earthquake zones. Their medicine had entire fields devoted to trauma, to keeping a body working after it had been broken. Human engineering had a concept baked into its bones that most alien species had never needed to develop seriously: graceful degradation. The idea that a system could lose 60% of itself, and the remaining 40% could still complete the mission. She tapped the layered diagram. The Ardent Cross II, that was the name, already decided, already filed in the classified registry, would not be built to avoid damage. It would be built to receive damage, adapt to it in real time, and continue functioning at full combat capacity. The hull composite was derived from research into organisms found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, creatures that survived pressures that would flatten conventional steel into foil. The internal architecture was modular and redundant in ways no alien shipbuilder had attempted, because most alien shipbuilders had not thought to study marine biology when designing spacecraft. Dara looked at the diagram for a long time. She asked about weapons. Nadia smiled slightly, the specific smile that meant she had been waiting for the question. The weapons were not the point, she said. Or rather, they were not the most interesting part. The most interesting part was the gravity anchor system, a network of projectors capable of locking a target vessel inside a generated gravitational field, not to crush it, just to stop it, to hold it completely still while everything else happened around it. No alien navy had fielded anything like it, because the power requirements were extreme, and the engineering had been considered impractical for 2 decades. Nadia had found a way to make it practical. She had also solved the self-repair problem, drone swarms, housed in sealed bays throughout the ship's body, capable of patching hull breaches and rerouting power conduits during active combat. The ship would visibly repair itself in the middle of a fight. Nadia said this was partly functional and partly psychological. Partly psychological, Dara repeated. Nadia said yes. She said there was a reason humans, when threatened, tended to make a point of being seen to survive. It changed something in the mind of whoever was watching. The Vorathi had broadcast the destruction of the Ardent Cross because they wanted the galaxy to watch something break. She wanted the galaxy to watch something refuse to break. Dara was quiet for a moment. Then she said she wanted command of the vessel when it was finished. Nadia said she had already put the request in writing before Dara arrived. Outside, the skeleton crew worked without talking much. The framing elements grew slowly in the far end of the cavern. Above them, 3 kilometers of Titan rock sat between their work and the rest of the universe, and no one looking at the shipyard from the outside would have seen anything unusual at all. That was the point. The galaxy was watching. It just did not know what to watch for. The Vorathi intelligence report filed 8 months into Project Warden was 3 pages long and concluded with a single confident line. Humanity is grieving. Let them grieve. The analyst who wrote it was not wrong about the grief. He was wrong about what humans did with it. Inside the Titan facility, the team Nadia had assembled was unlike anything a conventional defense program would have put together. There were engineers, yes, propulsion specialists, weapons systems architects, structural physicists, but sitting alongside them were people who had no obvious business being in a military shipyard. There was a woman named Dr. Solis who had spent 15 years studying how deep ocean creatures survived environments that should have killed them. Her research into cellular pressure adaptation had been considered academic, interesting, but impractical outside of marine biology. Nadia had read her work 2 years before the attack on the Ardent Cross and had filed it away with the instinct that it would matter someday. She had been right. The outer hull composite of the Ardent Cross II was built on Solis's findings. Not steel, not the conventional ceramic hull, used in most human warships, but a layered adaptive material that compressed under impact and redistributed force, rather than absorbing it in a fixed point. The Vorathi weapons that had cut clean through the original Ardent Cross would hit the new hull and find it behaving in ways their targeting calculations had never been designed to account for. There was also a man named Haruto, a trauma surgeon and biomechanical engineer who had spent his career figuring out how to keep human bodies functioning after catastrophic damage. He had redesigned the ship's internal layout from a medical perspective, not the medical bay specifically, but the entire interior architecture. In a normal ship, critical systems were centralized. It was efficient. It was also a vulnerability, because one strike to the right section could end a battle. Haruto had applied the logic of the human nervous system to the ship's infrastructure. Redundant pathways, distributed processing, no single point of failure. Power could be rerouted in seconds. Life support could operate from 4 separate independent nodes, any one of which was enough to sustain the crew. If the ship lost its main bridge, it had 2 backup command centers built into sections of the vessel that looked, from the outside, like storage holds. And there was a historian named Adiz, who had no engineering credentials at all, and whom 3 of the senior engineers had questioned loudly when Nadia brought her in. Adiz's job was to read. She read every recorded account of every space battle in the documented history of interstellar conflict, not just human conflicts, but Vorathi engagements, Tharani border wars, the long Sulkai expansion campaigns. She was looking for patterns, not tactics of patterns. The deep behavioral habits that species fell into during combat, the assumptions they brought to every fight without realizing those assumptions were there. What she found was that every spacefaring species with a militaristic tradition fought the same way at the psychological level, regardless of how different their weapons or ships looked. They all fought to end the battle quickly. They all aimed for decisive damage, one hard strike, or a coordinated sequence designed to reach a tipping point fast. They all had an internal concept of what it meant for a fight to be over, and they all stopped escalating once that threshold seemed to be crossed. She wrote a report that Nadia read in one sitting. The summary was simple. Every enemy humanity might face had been shaped, culturally and militarily, by the assumption that a sufficiently damaged opponent stops fighting. They had never seriously prepared for an opponent that got hit, was visibly and severely damaged, and then kept coming. Not because of stubbornness or poor tactical judgment, but because that was simply not something any of them had needed to plan for. In the history of recorded interstellar conflict, no species had engineered specifically for that quality. Humans had not engineered for it either, not deliberately, but humans had thousands of years of stories about it. Their folklore was full of wounded things that did not stop. Their military history was full of documented cases of units that had taken losses that should have been decisive and had kept fighting anyway. Their medicine was built around the idea that a living thing could be held together through damage that seemed unsurvivable. It was in the culture the way deep roots are in soil, not visible at the surface, but present everywhere underneath. Nadia took Adiz's report and made it required reading for every department head on the project. Then she posted one line from it on the wall of the main engineering bay, where everyone could see it each morning. The most dangerous thing is not a weapon. It is an opponent who does not fall down when you expect them to. The Vorathi spy satellite that passed over Titan's upper atmosphere 14 months into the project sent back images of the same surface activity. It had always seen routine traffic, standard supply shipments, nothing unusual. The analyst who reviewed the footage noted that construction activity at the public-facing shipyard seemed slightly elevated, but attributed it to a rumored new civilian transport contract. He was correct that construction activity was elevated. He was looking at the wrong level. 3 kilometers below, the Ardent Cross II was taking its final shape, and the people building it were doing so with the particular focused quiet of those who had something specific to prove. Not to the galaxy, not to the Vorathi. To 3 names written in a cracked finger log, recorded by a captain in the cold and the dark, because it had felt important to say them out loud. The first live fire test happened at 300 hours, Titan time, when the surface was in its long dark and no orbiting telescope was angled correctly to catch the light. The test was simple: hit the ship with everything they had and see what happened. Nadia stood at the observation window in the upper gallery of the testing bay, watching the Ardent Cross II sit in the center of the chamber. Up close, the ship did not look like a warship. It looked like something that had grown rather than been built, dense and layered, with a surface texture that caught light at odd angles because the adaptive hull compound had a slight organic quality to it. The same quality Solis had described in the organism she had spent years studying. It absorbed rather than reflected. It took what came at it and did something internal with it that you could not quite see from the outside. The first test round hit the forward section at combat velocity. The hull dented, visibly, measurably, in a way that would have ended a conventional ship's structural integrity, and then, over the following 40 seconds, slowly pushed back. Not fully, not perfectly, but the deformation reduced by 60% as the internal material redistributed the stress load across the broader surface. Solis, standing next to Nadia at the observation window, said nothing. She just made a small mark on her tablet. The second round hit the same spot, deliberately, to simulate a sustained targeted attack. The repair drones launched from their bays before the impact sound had finished echoing in the chamber. Small, fast, ceramic-coated units that moved across the whole surface with the coordinated logic of a single mind divided into 100 small bodies. They were patching before the dust had settled. By the time the third round fired, the point of impact had a fresh layer of adaptive compound over the damaged section. It was not invisible. It was not perfect. You could still see where the hits had landed. But the ship was whole. Haruto, watching from the back of the gallery, walked out without saying anything and returned 7 minutes later with a thermos of coffee that he shared with no one, because he needed both hands to hold the thermos steady. Nobody mentioned it. Over the next 3 weeks, the testing phase escalated. They brought in Vorathi-equivalent weapons, energy profiles matched to the attack signature recovered from the Ardent Cross black box recordings. They tested them against the hull at point-blank range. They tested them at combat angles. They tested sustained fire across the same section for 90 consecutive seconds, which was well beyond anything a real engagement would demand, because Nadia wanted to know where the limit was. The limit was farther than any of them had initially calculated. The gravity anchor system was tested in isolation, then in combination with weapons fire. The projectors worked on the principle of generating a dense localized field around a target vessel, not crushing, not destructive, just overwhelming. A ship caught in an anchor field could not accelerate, could not rotate, could not change its orientation. Its weapons could still fire, but everything else was locked. The power draw was enormous, and Nadia had spent 6 months solving the energy distribution problem. The solution was inelegant, and she said so openly, which made her team respect her more. She had rerouted secondary drive power in a way that meant the ship could not jump to faster-than-light travel while the anchors were active. But that was a trade she was willing to make. If you needed to lock something in place, you were already in the fight. You were not running. Adiz attended every test. She had no functional role in the engineering process, but Nadia kept her present anyway. During the third week, after a full ship impact simulation that left the repair drones working for 11 minutes before the hull was fully closed, Adiz said something that stuck. She said that the Vorathi would recognize the hull repair, and it would confuse them technically, but that was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that they would see it and feel something they did not have a word for. Because every sentient species that had ever conducted warfare had an instinct, deep, cultural, baked into the way they trained their soldiers and designed their strategies. That said, a heavily damaged enemy was a nearly defeated enemy. The sight of an opponent taking significant hits and repairing visibly was not just technically unexpected. It was instinct violating. It would produce a moment of pure cognitive disruption before their tactical training kicked back in. She said that moment, before the instinct reasserts itself, was the most dangerous window in any battle. Nadia walked to the window and looked at the ship for a long time without speaking. Then she told the engineering team that the drone repair cycle needed to be optimized, so that the most visible repairs happened in the first 40 seconds of any engagement. Not because that was the most technically efficient approach, it was not, but because they were not building just a ship. They were building an argument. The argument was simple and it had no words. It was just a ship that got hit, visibly, in front of everyone watching, and then closed its own wounds and kept moving. 18 months after Nadia had first walked into the Sublevel 3 facility, the Ardent Cross II was certified for active deployment. The crew was 46 people, all volunteers, most of them with some connection to the original attack, family members of those lost, survivors, people who had watched the Vorathi broadcast and carried it with them ever since. Dara Osai read their names before the launch briefing, the way she had read 3 other names into a cracked log in the cold, because it felt important to say them out loud. 46 people held their breath when the Ardent Cross II dropped out of faster-than-light travel into the disputed corridor. No one gave an order to be quiet. It just happened, the particular silence of people who had rehearsed something 100 times and now found themselves in the real version of it. The ship's passive sensors swept the surrounding space and came back with the kind of emptiness that did not feel like emptiness. Dara had been in enough dangerous corridors to know the difference between space that had nothing in it and space that was waiting. She told the helm to cut main drive power to 30% and hold position. She told the light's crew to reduce external running lights to minimum. From the outside, in the right sensor frequency, the Ardent Cross II would look like a damaged vessel drifting on residual momentum. They waited for 4 hours. The Vorathi warship came out of faster-than-light travel 11,000 kilometers off the port side, exactly where Adi's pattern analysis had predicted, based on how the Vorathi liked to approach a suspicious target. Entry angle that gave maximum firing solution while keeping their own drive flare behind a sensor shadow. Efficient. Practiced. The same approach vector their commanders had trained on for 30 years. The Vorathi ship was a mid-weight patrol cruiser, not a capital ship, but nothing small either. It had 3 times the conventional weapons payload of the original Ardent Cross. Its hull was the standard Vorathi combat composite, gray and angular, built for speed and focused firepower. Its name, translated from Vorathi script displayed on its hull plating, meant proven superiority. The crew of the Ardent Cross, II, watched it approach on their screens. Someone near the back of the bridge made a quiet sound that was not quite a laugh. The Vorathi cruiser did not open a communication channel. It simply broadcast on the same open frequency the original attack had used, a standard territorial warning, a signal that said in the Vorathi military language, "You are in contested space, identify or be treated as hostile." The same message, the same frequency, the same tone. Familiar. Routine. Dara had listened to the recording of it many times in the months before this moment. She waited until the Vorathi cruiser had closed to 3,000 kilometers. Close enough. Good range for what came next. She opened a channel. She identified the Ardent Cross II by name and registration. She said, in standard interstellar trade language that every spacefaring species used, "We know this corridor. We've been here before. We think you remember us too." There was a pause on the Vorathi end. 43 seconds, Dara counted them, before the Vorathi commander responded. His translation came through flat and cold. He said the corridor was contested territory and the human vessel would withdraw or face the consequences. Dara said, "Fire 1, forward section, let's see what we built." The weapons officer looked at her. She said it again calmly. The officer relayed the instruction to the Vorathi by open channel first. She wanted them to know it was coming, wanted them to aim where she said, wanted the first hit to be on her terms. The Vorathi commander paused again. Then, with what the communications officer described afterward as audible confusion, the Vorathi cruiser fired a single mid-yield energy round directly at the Ardent Cross II forward hull. The hit was real. The damage was real. A section of forward hull plating compressed and buckled in a way that the ship's sensors logged accurately as a significant structural impact. The repair drones launched in 11 seconds. On the Vorathi cruiser's sensors, the Ardent Cross II registered the hit, registered the internal response activity, and then, over the following 40 seconds, began to visibly close the damage. The hull surface moved. The buckled section reduced. The impact site shrank. The Vorathi commander did not fire again immediately. That pause, that specific pause of 7 full seconds before any further action, was the moment Adiz had predicted. Dara had planned everything around it. She opened the channel again. She spoke slowly and without anger, the same flat, direct voice she had used in the emergency log when she read 3 names into a recorder in the dark. She said that 18 months ago, a Vorathi crew had destroyed a human cargo ship in this corridor, broadcast the destruction to the galaxy, and left 9 survivors to drift in the cold. She said that humanity had spent those 18 months building a response. She said the response was not a protest and it was not a threat. It was a demonstration. She said the Ardent Cross II would now take 3 more direct hits. They could choose where, and the crew would be fine, and the ship would close every wound, and then she would explain what came next. The Vorathi commander was silent for 19 seconds. Then his weapons officer fired 3 more times at different sections of the hull, each hit real, each logged, each triggering the repair cycle. The ship rocked slightly on the 3rd one. Someone on the bridge grabbed a console edge. Nobody made a sound. At the end of the 3rd repair cycle, Dara said, 20 more ships like this one are in production. You have 30 seconds to broadcast an acknowledgement of what was done to the Ardent Cross and her crew. After that, I will demonstrate what else we built. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere on the proven superiority, a conversation was happening that the Vorathi commander had not been trained for. Dara waited. The 30 seconds passed. No broadcast came from the proven superiority. Instead, the Vorathi cruiser fired its secondary weapons array, a full spread, not a single warning round, aimed at the Ardent Cross II engine section. It was the same targeting priority they had used on the original ship. Take out the drive, leave the crew stranded, humiliate without destroying. Dara had anticipated this. The gravity anchors engaged at the moment the weapon's signature peaked on sensors, a half-second before impact, which was precisely the margin Nadia had engineered the targeting system around. The anchor field locked the proven superiority in place at 3,000 kilometers. The Vorathi cruiser's drives fired at full power. Nothing moved. The field held like a hand wrapped around the hull of the ship, gentle and absolute. The proven superiority stayed exactly where it was, oriented exactly as it had been, while its engines pushed uselessly against physics it was not equipped to argue with. The secondary spread hit the Ardent Cross II engine section. Real damage. 3 repair cycles triggered simultaneously. The engine output dropped to 62% for 90 seconds while the drones worked. Then it climbed back. The bridge crew of the Ardent Cross II watched the repair progress bar on their screens. No one spoke. When it reached full, someone exhaled slowly, and that was the only sound. Dara opened the channel again. She said, "You're not destroyed, your crew is fine, your ship is intact. We want you to understand that was a choice, not a limitation." She told the Vorathi commander that the anchor would hold for as long as she left it running. She told him that the Ardent Cross II had taken 7 direct hits in the last 8 minutes, and every system was at or above 90% function. She told him that the broadcast going out on the same open frequency the original attack had used, the same one used to announce to the galaxy that humanity traveled in breakable things, was now carrying a different message. It carried the sensor logs of the last 8 minutes, all of it. Every hit, every repair cycle, the anchor field activation, the drive test of the locked Vorathi cruiser, automatically distributed to every receiver in range, which included 3 Therani merchant vessels, 1 Sulkai observation post, and 2 other Vorathi patrol ships that had been monitoring the corridor from a distance. Dara then said the things she had been composing in her head since the day she had walked out of the airlock of the wrecked Ardent Cross and looked back at the torn hull plates. She said humanity did not want war. She said humanity was not interested in territory or dominance or revenge in the traditional sense. She said that what had happened 18 months ago had cost 3 human lives, and she spoke their names Yusuf, Priya, Renard clearly and without rushing into the open channel, so that anyone listening would hear that they had names and she remembered them. She said that humanity had spent those months building something that could not be broken the way the Ardent Cross had been broken, and that 20 more were coming, and that after those 20, there would be more. Not because humanity wanted to fill the galaxy with warships, but because the cost of damaging humanity had to be too high for anyone to consider. Then she released the anchor field. The proven superiority was free. Its drives were still running at full power, and it moved fast out of the corridor and into faster-than-light travel within 4 minutes. No further communication, no broadcast acknowledgement, just the specific speed of a crew that had encountered something they had not been told to expect. Within 6 hours, the sensor logs had reached every major species with a receiver in the quadrant. Within 3 days, 2 Vorathi senior commanders had filed formal resignations. The official stated reasons were administrative. Everyone understood the real ones. Within a week, the Tharani Collective, which had been quietly pressuring human trade routes for 2 years through regulatory obstruction and strategic delays, sent a diplomatic message to the Interstellar Defense Council requesting a meeting at the earliest convenience to discuss mutual frameworks for corridor access. The message was polite. It was also the first one the Tharani had sent to humanity without making humanity wait for a response window. The Sulkai observation post filed a report that circulated among 3 alien intelligence services within the month. It was a technical analysis of what the Ardent Cross II had demonstrated. Its final assessment line was translated into standard trade language and passed around by several diplomatic channels. It said, this was not a weapons demonstration. It was a proof of principle. At Titan, in the Sublevel 3 facility, Nadia read the Sulkai assessment and pinned it to the wall beside the line she had posted at the start of the project. She looked at both of them for a moment. Then she turned back to the work table, where the blueprints for ship number 3 were spread open, and she picked up her stylus, and she went back to work. Dara's message, the one that had gone out on open channel with the sensor logs, ended with a single sentence that various alien news services quoted in their reporting over the following weeks, translated with minor variations but consistent in meaning. She had said, "We remember everyone we lose. We suggest you remember that too."